When my 10-year-old grandson died under suspicious circumstances, I kept his favorite teddy bear. My son and daughter-in-law forged documents and had me committed to a psychiatric hospital. On the first day inside, a phone rang from inside the bear. The voice said, "I need to tell you the truth. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from." My name is Patrick, and at 58 years old, I never imagined I'd find myself in a psychiatric hospital, wearing these thin cotton pajamas that smell like industrial bleach. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like angry wasps, and somewhere down the hall, I can hear Mrs. Davidson crying for her daughter who never visits. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with Tommy. Tommy was my grandson, 10 years old, with sandy hair that stuck up no matter how much his mother tried to tame it, and a gap-toothed grin that could light up the darkest room. He loved dinosaurs, chocolate chip cookies, and his stuffed bear named Captain Cuddles, a ratty brown thing he'd had since he was 2. That bear went everywhere with Tommy. To school, to sleepovers, even to the grocery store tucked under his arm like a security blanket. 3 weeks ago, Tommy died. The official story was an asthma attack. Sudden, they said. Unexpected. These things happen with children, the doctors explained with practiced sympathy. My son Michael and his wife Sandra nodded along, accepting condolences with the appropriate amount of grief. But something felt wrong from the moment I got that phone call. "Dad, you need to come to the hospital." Michael's voice was strained, but there was something else underneath it. Relief? I couldn't put my finger on it then, but it haunted me. When I arrived at Children's Memorial, Tommy was already gone. Sandra was sobbing into tissues, the kind of dramatic crying that seemed more performance than genuine grief. Michael paced the waiting room, his hands shaking, but his eyes were calculating. Even in my shock, I noticed he kept checking his phone. "Where's his inhaler?" I asked. Tommy always carried it, always. I'd watched Sandra remind him a dozen times during family dinners. "It was at home," Sandra said between sobs. "He forgot it this morning." But that didn't make sense. Tommy was responsible about his medication, too responsible for a 10-year-old. He'd nearly died from an attack when he was 7, and the experience had terrified him into being vigilant about his inhaler. I tried to ask more questions, but Michael pulled me aside. "Dad, Sandra's devastated. Please don't make this harder than it already is." The funeral was 2 days later, a closed casket, which Sandra insisted on. "He looks peaceful," she said when I asked to see him one last time. "I want everyone to remember him as he was." After the service, as people filtered out of the funeral home, I found myself alone with Captain Cuddles. Tommy's bear sat on a small table next to the casket, surrounded by flowers that were already starting to wilt. Without thinking, I picked him up. The bear smelled like Tommy, that mixture of boy and bubblegum and something indefinably sweet that all children seem to carry. "Dad, what are you doing?" Michael appeared beside me, his voice sharp. "I just want to keep something of his," I said, clutching the bear tighter. Sandra emerged from a group of mourners, her eyes red-rimmed but alert. "That bear should stay with us, Patrick. Tommy would want his parents to have it. I'm his grandfather. I think he'd want me to have something too." The argument that followed was quiet but vicious. Sandra accused me of being selfish during their time of grief. Michael supported her, of course, he always did. But something in their desperation to keep the bear made me more determined to take it. In the end, I simply walked out with Captain Cuddles under my arm. They could fight me later if they wanted, but that night, I needed something of Tommy close to me. The real trouble started the next week, when I began asking questions around the neighborhood. Mrs. Chen, who lived next door to Michael and Sandra, mentioned seeing an ambulance at their house the night before Tommy died. Not the morning of his death, as they'd claimed. "I remember because my husband and I were watching the late news," she said, watering her petunias. "Must have been close to midnight." When I brought this up to Michael, his face went white. "Mrs. Chen is 86, Dad. She gets confused about timing." But I knew Mrs. Chen. Sharp as a tack, that woman. She could tell you what she had for breakfast 3 Tuesdays ago. I started calling the school, asking about Tommy's attendance the week before he died. The secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, told me Tommy had been absent for 2 days with a family emergency. What kind of emergency? I asked. I'm sorry, Mr. Walsh, but I can only discuss student records with parents or guardians. Every question I asked seemed to lead to a wall of silence or inconsistent answers. When I pressed Michael about the missed school days, he got angry. Dad, you're not thinking clearly. The grief is making you paranoid. Tommy died of an asthma attack. Period. You need to accept that and move on. But I couldn't move on. Something was wrong. And the more I pushed for answers, the more my son and daughter-in-law pulled away from me. The final straw came last Monday when I called the medical examiner's office. I just wanted to understand what had happened, to get some closure. The woman on the phone was polite, but firm. I'm sorry, sir, but we can only release that information to immediate family members. I'm his grandfather. The records show that the parents have requested no information be released to extended family members at this time. Extended family. Like I was some distant relative, instead of the man who'd changed Tommy's diapers when Michael was working double shifts to pay for law school. That evening, Michael and Sandra showed up at my apartment with 2 official-looking men in suits. One introduced himself as Dr. Harrison, a psychiatrist. The other was some kind of social worker whose name I didn't catch. Dad, we're worried about you, Michael said, not meeting my eyes. Your behavior since Tommy's death has been concerning. Dr. Harrison stepped forward with a clipboard. Mr. Walsh, your family has reported that you've been making paranoid accusations, harassing medical professionals, and showing signs of delusional thinking. We think it would be best if you came with us for a brief evaluation. I'm not delusional, I said, backing toward my bedroom. I'm asking legitimate questions about my grandson's death. Dad, please. Sandra's voice was honey-sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. We just want to make sure you're okay. A few days of rest, some medication to help with the grief, and you'll feel so much better. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised from a baby, hoping to see some recognition in his eyes that this was wrong. Instead, I saw a stranger who was willing to have his own father committed to silence his questions. If you don't come voluntarily, Dr. Harrison said, his voice gentle but firm, we have the authority to have you transported. That's how I ended up here at Riverside Psychiatric Hospital, in a room with bars on the windows and a roommate who talks to invisible cats. They took my clothes, my phone, my wallet, everything except Captain Cuddles, which I'd been holding when they arrived. The bear can stay, Dr. Harrison had said, with what he probably thought was kindness. Sometimes familiar objects help with the transition. Now I lie here on this narrow bed, staring at the ceiling tiles and listening to the institutional sounds of a place where people are sent to be forgotten. My son signed papers saying I was a danger to myself and others. He authorized my commitment based on the testimony of a psychiatrist who spoke to me for exactly 15 minutes. They've scheduled me for evaluation sessions starting tomorrow. Medication management, they call it, group therapy, art therapy, a whole menu of treatments for my alleged delusions. But I'm not delusional. I know what I saw in Michael's eyes at the funeral. I know what I heard in Sandra's voice. And I know that 10-year-old boys don't just forget their inhalers and die from asthma attacks after missing school for mysterious family emergencies. I pull Captain Cuddles closer, breathing in that fading scent of Tommy. Whatever secret my son and daughter-in-law are hiding, whatever really happened to my grandson, I won't stop looking for answers, even from in here, especially from in here. The first night in Riverside Psychiatric Hospital, I barely slept. The mattress felt like it was stuffed with concrete, and every few hours, a nurse would shine a flashlight through the small window in my door, checking to make sure I hadn't somehow vanished into thin air. My roommate Gerald mumbled conversations with his invisible cats until nearly 3 in the morning. I clutched Captain Cuddles against my chest, trying to find some comfort in the familiar weight of him. The bear felt different somehow, heavier than I remembered. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe grief was playing tricks on my mind the way everyone kept insisting. Morning came with the jarring sound of a buzzer announcing breakfast. Gerald popped up from his bed like a jack-in-the-box. immediately starting his morning routine of setting out invisible food for his cats. I watched him carefully arrange nothing on the floor, speaking to animals that weren't there, and wondered if this was my future. Would I eventually retreat so far into my own mind that I'd lose touch with reality altogether? "Come on, Patrick," Gerald said cheerfully. "Breakfast time. The cats have already eaten, so we're good to go." Yo. I followed him down the hallway, past doors marked with numbers instead of names, past other patients, shuffling in various states of medication-induced calm. The dining hall smelled like disinfectant and overcooked eggs. I picked at my food while a woman at the next table argued with someone who wasn't there about the proper way to fold fitted sheets. After breakfast came my first official evaluation with Dr. Harrison. His office was designed to be calming: soft lighting, earth-tone furniture, a box of tissues strategically placed within easy reach. He smiled as I sat down, the same practiced smile I'd seen the night they brought me here. "How are you feeling this morning, Patrick?" "Like a prisoner," I said. He made a note on his pad. "That's understandable. The transition to inpatient care can be difficult, but we're here to help you work through your grief in a healthy way." "Yar, there's nothing unhealthy about wanting to know how my grandson died." Another note. "Tell me about these concerns you have. Your son mentioned you've been making accusations about Tommy's death." I spent the next 45 minutes explaining everything: the inconsistencies in their story, Mrs. Chen's observation about the ambulance, Tommy's missed school days, the way Michael and Sandra had acted at the funeral. Dr. Harrison listened with the patience of someone who'd heard similar stories 1,000 times before. "Grief can manifest in many ways," he said when I finished. "Sometimes our minds create mysteries where none exist because accepting a simple, tragic truth is too painful." "So you think I'm making this up?" "I think you're a grandfather who loved his grandson very much, and losing him suddenly has been traumatic. The mind sometimes protects us from overwhelming grief by giving us something to focus on, even if that something isn't real." Real. Nothing felt real anymore except the weight of Captain Cuddles in my arms and the growing certainty that I was the only person who cared enough about Tommy to ask the hard questions. They gave me a schedule after lunch: group therapy at 2, art therapy at 4, medication evaluation at 6. I was being processed through their system like a package on an assembly line, each stop designed to adjust my thinking until I accepted their version of reality. But that evening, as I sat on my bed holding Captain Cuddles and watching Gerald have an animated conversation with his invisible pets, something extraordinary happened. A phone rang. Not the hospital phone on the nightstand. This was different. A soft, muffled ringtone that seemed to be coming from somewhere close by. I looked around the room, confused. Gerald was too busy with his cats to notice. The ringing stopped, then started again. This time, I realized it was coming from Captain Cuddles. My hands trembling, I felt along the bare seams until I found a small opening near the back, carefully hidden in the brown fur. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a cell phone, an old model, the kind Tommy used to call me when his parents weren't paying attention. The phone rang again. With shaking fingers, I answered it. "Patrick? Oh, thank God you're there." The voice was female, young, and terrified. It took me a moment to place it. Emma? Emma Rodriguez had been Tommy's babysitter for the past 2 years, a college student studying elementary education. She'd been the only person besides me who seemed to truly understand Tommy's quirky sense of humor and his obsession with dinosaur facts. She was supposed to watch him the weekend before he died, but Sandra had canceled at the last minute, saying they'd decided to have a family weekend instead. "Patrick, I'm so sorry." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "I wanted to call you before, but I was scared. I'm still scared." "Emma, where are you? What's going on?" "I'm hiding. I had to leave town after what happened to Tommy. Patrick, he didn't die the way they said he did." My heart pounded so hard, I was sure Gerald would hear it. "What do you mean?" "I was there that night, the night he really died, not the morning they claimed. Sandra called me around 10 p.m., said it was an emergency, that Tommy was having an asthma attack, and they needed me to come over immediately." I gripped the phone tighter. Go on. When I got there, Tommy was already unconscious. But Patrick, something was wrong. He wasn't having an asthma attack. His breathing was shallow, but it wasn't the gasping, wheezing sound he made during his attacks. This was different, and his lips, they had this strange blue tint. Did you call 911? I tried to, but Michael grabbed my phone. He said they'd already called, that the ambulance was on the way, but Patrick, I waited there for almost an hour, and no ambulance came. They kept telling me to wait in the living room while they took care of him, but I could hear them in the kitchen, whispering. My mouth went dry. What were they saying? I couldn't make out most of it, but I heard Sandra say something about making sure the story was straight, and Michael asking, "What about Emma?" That's when I knew I was in danger. How did you get away? I told them I was going to my car to get my inhaler. I have asthma too, and I said the stress was triggering an attack. Instead, I drove straight home and started packing. I've been staying with my aunt in Oregon ever since. The pieces were starting to fit together in a horrible picture. Emma, do you think I think they killed him, Patrick. I think they killed Tommy and then staged it to look like an asthma attack the next morning. And when you started asking questions, they had you committed so no one would believe you. I had to bite my tongue to keep from crying out. Everything I'd suspected, every instinct that had told me something was wrong, had been right. My grandson had been murdered by his own parents. Emma, we need proof. We need evidence. I know. That's why I hid the phone in Captain Cuddles before I left. I knew Tommy would have wanted you to have his bear, and I hoped if something happened to me, you'd find it eventually. What kind of evidence do you have? I recorded some of their conversation that night on my phone before I left. It's not much, but it's something. And Patrick, there's more. I think I know why they did it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Tell me. Michael owes money, a lot of money. I overheard him on a phone call a few weeks before Tommy died, talking about gambling debts and how he needed to find a solution fast. And Sandra. Patrick, I don't think Sandra ever wanted to be a mother. She used to complain about Tommy constantly when she thought no one was listening, called him a burden, said he was holding her back from her career. The phone line crackled with static, and Emma's voice became more urgent. Patrick, I'm running out of battery and I can't risk staying on the line too long, but I need you to know I recorded everything on a backup drive. It's hidden somewhere safe. If something happens to me, my aunt knows where it is and who to contact. Emma, you need to go to the police. With what? A partial recording of a conversation that could be interpreted a dozen different ways? They'll say I misunderstood, that grief was making me paranoid, just like they're saying about you. She was right, and I knew it. Without more concrete evidence, it would be her word against Michael and Sandra's, and they'd already demonstrated their willingness to manipulate official reports and professional opinions. What do we do? I asked. We get you out of there first. I've been doing research on psychiatric commitments. If we can prove they forged documents or coerced doctors into signing off on your commitment, we might be able to get you released and discredit their credibility. How? I'm working on it. I have a friend whose mother is a lawyer. She specializes in elder abuse cases. If we can show that Michael and Sandra had you committed to silence you about Tommy's death. The line started breaking up. Emma, are you there? Patrick, I have to go. Someone's coming. I'll try to call you again tomorrow night, same time. Don't trust anyone there, and whatever you do, don't let them know about the phone. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, clutching the small phone, and feeling the weight of everything Emma had told me. Tommy hadn't died from an asthma attack. He'd been murdered by his own parents, and when I'd gotten too close to the truth, they'd had me committed to a psychiatric hospital. But now I had an ally. Someone who'd witnessed their lies firsthand and was willing to help me expose them. For the first time since Tommy's death, I felt something other than grief and helplessness. I felt hope. The next 24 hours crawled by like they were made of molasses. Every minute felt like an hour as I waited for Emma's call, clutching Captain Cuddles and trying to act normal during my scheduled therapy sessions. Dr. Harrison seemed pleased with my progress during our morning meeting, noting that I appeared calmer and more accepting of my situation. If only he knew the storm brewing inside my chest. I participated in group therapy, listening to other patients share their stories of depression, anxiety, and various forms of mental breakdown. Margaret, a woman in her 70s, talked about how her children had her committed after she started acting paranoid about her late husband's business partner stealing money from their accounts. Harold, a man about my age, described how his son had him hospitalized after he questioned some suspicious financial transactions involving his savings. As I listened to their stories, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every single person in our group had been committed by family members after asking inconvenient questions or challenging financial decisions. Either this was the world's strangest coincidence, or there were more people like me than I'd realized. During art therapy, I found myself sketching Tommy's face from memory, trying to capture that gap-toothed grin that had been his trademark. The therapist, a young woman named Jennifer, stopped by my table and smiled at the drawing. "That's very good, Patrick. Who is this?" "My grandson," I said quietly. "Tell me about him." So I did. I told her about Tommy's obsession with dinosaurs, how he could recite facts about velociraptors and triceratops for hours. I told her about the time he'd tried to convince me that if we dug deep enough in my backyard, we'd eventually find dinosaur bones. I told her about his weekly sleepovers at my apartment, when we'd make chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast, and he'd insist on adding way too many chocolate chips. "He sounds like he was a wonderful boy," Jennifer said softly. "It must be very difficult to lose someone so important to you." I nodded, not trusting my voice. What I didn't tell her was that with each memory I shared, each detail I recalled about Tommy's personality and habits, I became more convinced that Emma was right. Tommy had been a cautious child when it came to his asthma. After his severe attack at age 7, he'd become almost obsessive about having his inhaler nearby. The idea that he'd forgotten it on the day he died became more implausible with every memory I examined. That evening, I lay in bed listening to Gerald's nightly conversation with his invisible cats, waiting for Emma's call. When the phone finally rang at exactly 9 p.m., I answered it before the first ring finished. "Emma?" "Patrick, thank God. I was worried they might have found the phone." "I've been careful. Tell me what you've learned." I spoke with my friend's mother, the lawyer. "Her name is Mrs. Chen, no relation to your neighbor. And she says what happened to you is more common than people realize. Adult children having their parents committed to prevent them from interfering with financial plans or to silence them about family secrets." Mrs. Chen, even her name gave me hope. "Did she say how we can fight it?" "She's willing to help, but we need more evidence. Right now, it's your word against Michael and Sandra's, and you're the one in a psychiatric hospital. We need to prove that your commitment was fraudulent." "How do we do that?" Mrs. Chen says we need to document everything. Every conversation with doctors, every medication they give you, every therapy session. She also wants me to investigate the doctors who signed your commitment papers. I thought about Dr. Harrison and his quick 15-minute evaluation. The psychiatrist barely spoke to me before deciding I needed to be hospitalized. That's what we're hoping to prove. Mrs. Chen says most legitimate psychiatric commitments require extensive evaluation, multiple doctor consultations, and clear evidence of imminent danger. If we can show that your commitment was rushed and based on false information. "What about the recording you made that night?" Emma's voice grew quieter. "I've been analyzing it. Most of it is too muffled to make out clearly, but there are a few parts that might be useful. Michael definitely says something about making sure the story matches, and Sandra mentioned something about the insurance money." "Insurance money." My blood ran cold. "Emma, do you know if they had a life insurance policy on Tommy?" "I don't know, but Mrs. Chen says that would be a strong motive if they did. She's going to help me research it." We talked for another 20 minutes, with Emma filling me in on her investigation. She'd discovered that Dr. Harrison had a history of quick commitments, often based on family requests rather than thorough evaluations. She'd also found out that the second doctor who'd signed my papers, Dr. Martinez, had been disciplined twice by the state medical board for questionable practices. "Patrick, there's something else, something I remembered about that night." "What?" "When I first got to the house, before they sent me to the living room, I saw Sandra in the kitchen. She was washing something in the sink, scrubbing it really hard. When she saw me, she quickly dried it and put it away, but I got a glimpse of it. What was it? A small glass vial, the kind they use for liquid medications. And, Patrick, I could smell something strange in the kitchen. Something sweet and chemical-like. My hands started shaking. Did you tell Mrs. Chen about this? Yes. She says if we can prove that Sandra had access to medications that could have harmed Tommy, combined with the insurance motive and the rushed commitment to silence you, we might have a case. After Emma hung up, I lay awake thinking about everything she'd told me. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, forming a picture so horrific I could barely accept it. My son and daughter-in-law had killed their own child for insurance money, then had me committed when I asked too many questions. But how does a person come to terms with something like that? How do you accept that the son you raised, the man you taught to ride a bike and helped with homework, could murder his own child? The next morning during breakfast, I found myself studying the other patients more carefully. Margaret, the elderly woman whose children had her committed for questioning financial irregularities, sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating her oatmeal. Her movements were precise, controlled, not the actions of someone suffering from dementia or paranoid delusions. I walked over and sat beside her. Mind if I join you? She looked up, surprised. Most patients kept to themselves, lost in their own medicated fog. Of course not, dear. Margaret, right? I'm Patrick. Yes, I remember you from group therapy. You're the grandfather whose family thinks you're paranoid about your grandson's death. Her directness caught me off guard. That's right. And you're the woman whose children think you're paranoid about financial theft. She smiled grimly. Funny how that works, isn't it? We start asking inconvenient questions, and suddenly, we're crazy. Do you really think your husband's business partner stole from you? I don't think it, dear. I know it. I have documentation, bank records, everything. But my children refuse to look at the evidence. They say grief is making me see things that aren't there. Why would they ignore evidence? Margaret's eyes hardened. Because they're in on it. My daughter married the business partner's son last year. They're all profiting from keeping me quiet. I stared at her, seeing my own situation reflected in her story. Have you tried getting a lawyer? How can I? I'm committed here indefinitely. My children have power of attorney. I can't even access my own bank accounts. The hopelessness in her voice made my chest tighten. Was this my future? Would I end up like Margaret, warehoused in this place while my son and daughter-in-law lived off Tommy's death benefits? That afternoon, during my session with Dr. Harrison, I decided to test something. Doctor, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about grief making us see mysteries where none exist. He smiled, pleased. I'm glad you're being open to that possibility, Patrick. I was wondering, though, how long does it typically take to complete a psychiatric evaluation for commitment? His smile faltered slightly. It varies depending on the circumstances. But there must be standard procedures, right? Multiple doctor consultations, psychological testing, that sort of thing? Patrick, your case was somewhat urgent. Your family was very concerned about your mental state. I understand. But in general, what's the typical process? Dr. Harrison shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. Patrick, I think we should focus on your treatment rather than dwelling on procedural details. His evasiveness told me everything I needed to know. Emma and Mrs. Chen were right. My commitment had been rushed, probably illegal. That evening, I called Emma again using Tommy's hidden phone. Patrick, I have news. Mrs. Chen found the insurance policy. My heart stopped. How much? $500,000. And, Patrick, it was taken out just 6 months ago. $500,000. Enough to pay off Michael's gambling debts and fund Sandra's career ambitions. Enough to make them see Tommy as a financial opportunity rather than their son. There's more, Emma continued. Mrs. Chen also discovered that Sandra's been researching pediatric medications online. Specifically, she'd been looking up information about drug interactions and toxic dosages in children. The room seemed to spin around me. When? The searches were made in the weeks leading up to Tommy's death. Mrs. Chen thinks we have enough to approach the authorities, but she wants to get you released first. If you're in a psychiatric hospital, your credibility as a witness will be compromised. How do we do that? Mrs. Chen is filing a motion to challenge your commitment. She's arguing that it was done without proper evaluation and that your family had ulterior motives for having you hospitalized. She thinks we can get a hearing within the next week. A hearing? A chance to tell my story to someone who might actually listen. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I might have a real chance at justice for Tommy. Emma, whatever happens, I want you to know how grateful I am. You could have stayed hidden, kept yourself safe. Instead, you're risking everything to help me find the truth. Tommy was a special kid, Patrick. He deserved better than what they did to him, and you deserve better than being silenced for asking the right questions. After hanging up, I held Captain Cuddles close and whispered to him in the darkness, "We're going to get justice for you, buddy. Your Uncle Patrick promises." For the first time in weeks, I fell asleep feeling something other than despair. The morning of my 4th day at Riverside Psychiatric Hospital brought an unexpected visitor. I was in the common room pretending to watch a daytime talk show while actually studying the staff schedules and security protocols when a nurse I hadn't seen before approached me. "Patrick Walsh?" she asked quietly. I nodded, immediately on guard. After 3 days of routine, any change felt potentially dangerous. "I'm Clara Mendez. I'm covering the evening shift tonight." She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "I understand you've been asking questions about your grandson's death." My heart started racing. Had someone discovered Emma's phone calls? Was this a trap? "I don't know what you mean," I said carefully. Clara's expression softened. "It's okay. I'm not here to report you or take away any contraband you might have. I'm here because I think you deserve to know that someone believes you." She sat down beside me, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my son 3 years ago. Miguel? He was 12. The official cause of death was a drug overdose, but Miguel had never touched drugs in his life. He was terrified of needles, wouldn't even take vitamins without a fight." I studied her face, seeing the same pain in her eyes that I felt in my own chest every morning when I woke up and remembered that Tommy was gone. What happened? My ex-husband had custody that weekend. When Miguel died, there were inconsistencies in his story, just like what you've described about your grandson. But when I started asking questions, my ex-husband had me committed for psychiatric evaluation. Said grief was making me delusional. The parallel to my situation was chilling. "How did you get out?" "A sympathetic doctor helped me. Dr. Martinez. He's still here at Riverside, and he's been watching your case with interest." Dr. Martinez. The name sounded familiar, and then I remembered Emma had mentioned him as one of the doctors who'd signed my commitment papers, but she'd said he had a history of questionable practices. "I thought Dr. Martinez was part of the problem," I said. Clara shook her head. "Dr. Martinez was forced to sign your commitment papers. I can't go into details here, but let's just say the hospital administration put pressure on him. He's been looking for a way to make it right ever since." Before I could respond, Clara stood up and walked away, leaving me more confused than ever. Could I trust her? Was Dr. Martinez really an ally, or was this some elaborate test of my mental state? That afternoon, during my regular session with Dr. Harrison, I decided to probe a little deeper into my commitment process. "Doctor, I've been wondering about Dr. Martinez. I understand he was involved in my evaluation?" Dr. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dr. Martinez consulted on your case, yes. I'd like to speak with him if possible, get his perspective on my treatment plan." "That won't be necessary. I'm your primary physician here. But surely a second opinion wouldn't hurt." "Patrick, I think you're overthinking this. Dr. Martinez is quite busy with his own caseload." The defensiveness in Dr. Harrison's voice told me that Clara might be right. There was tension between the two doctors, and it seemed to revolve around my case. That evening, as I was finishing dinner in the dining hall, an older man in a white coat approached my table. He was Hispanic, probably in his early 60s, with kind eyes and graying hair. "Mr. Walsh, I'm Dr. Martinez. I wonder if we could have a brief conversation?" I glanced around the dining hall. A few nurses were scattered about, but none seemed to be paying particular attention to us. "Of course." Dr. Martinez sat down across from me, his expression serious. "I want to apologize for my role in your commitment. I was placed in a very difficult position. And I made choices I'm not proud of. What do you mean? He lowered his voice. Your son and daughter-in-law came to me 3 weeks ago with documentation claiming you were having a psychotic break. They had letters from your neighbors, statements about erratic behavior, even a report from your family doctor suggesting early-stage dementia. That's impossible. I haven't seen my family doctor in 6 months, and my neighbors barely know me. I suspected as much. The documentation felt manufactured, but the hospital administrator, Dr. Reeves, insisted I sign off on the commitment. He said the family was prepared to take their concerns to another facility if we didn't act quickly. I felt a chill run down my spine. So it was all fake. I believe so. And after Nurse Mendez told me about her own experiences with false commitments, I started doing some research. Your case isn't isolated, Mr. Walsh. There's a pattern of adult children using psychiatric commitments to silence elderly family members who become inconvenient. Dr. Martinez glanced around the dining hall, then continued. I've been reviewing your file more carefully. Your psychological evaluation was woefully inadequate. Dr. Harrison spent 15 minutes with you and declared you delusional based entirely on your family's claims. In my professional opinion, you show no signs of mental illness beyond normal grief responses. Then why am I still here? Because challenging Dr. Harrison's diagnosis would require me to admit that I signed off on a fraudulent commitment. It could cost me my medical license. He paused, his expression pained. But keeping you here unjustly is costing me my integrity. Hope flickered in my chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you have legal representation, I'm prepared to testify that your commitment was based on false information and inadequate evaluation. I thought about Mrs. Chen, the lawyer Emma had found. I might have someone. Good. There's something else you should know. I've been quietly reviewing other cases like yours. There are currently 6 patients in this facility who appear to have been committed under similar circumstances. All elderly, all committed by family members who benefit financially from keeping them here. 6 patients. I thought about Margaret and Harold from group therapy, about the other faces I'd seen in the halls. How many families were using psychiatric hospitals as convenient dumping grounds for inconvenient relatives? Doctor, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think it's possible that my grandson was murdered? Dr. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Walsh, I'm a psychiatrist, not a criminal investigator, but I can tell you this. Your questions about your grandson's death are not the ramblings of a delusional mind. They're the logical concerns of a grandfather who loved his grandson and noticed inconsistencies in the official story. When Emma called that night, I had more to report than ever before. Patrick, that's incredible news about Dr. Martinez, she said, after I filled her in on the day's conversations. Mrs. Chen says having a doctor willing to testify that your commitment was fraudulent will strengthen our case enormously. What about the evidence against Michael and Sandra? Mrs. Chen has been busy. She's discovered that Michael's gambling debts were even worse than we thought. He owed over $200,000 to some very dangerous people. The threats were escalating in the weeks before Tommy died. $200,000, more than enough motive for murder. And Sandra? Mrs. Chen found her internet search history through a subpoena. Patrick, it's damning. Sandra researched dozens of medications that could cause respiratory failure in children. She also looked up information about how long different drugs stay in a child's system and how to avoid detection during autopsy. My hand started shaking. Hearing the details of how they'd planned Tommy's murder made it feel real in a way that was almost unbearable. There's more, Emma continued. Mrs. Chen contacted the medical examiner's office. Tommy's body was cremated within 48 hours of his death, before any toxicology tests could be completed. That's highly unusual for a child's death, even one that appears natural. They destroyed the evidence. It looks that way. But Mrs. Chen thinks we have enough circumstantial evidence to reopen the investigation, especially if we can get you released and discredit the commitment that was meant to silence you. When is the hearing? Tomorrow afternoon. Mrs. Chen has filed an emergency motion challenging your commitment. She's arguing that you were committed based on fraudulent documentation and without proper evaluation. Dr. Martinez has agreed to testify, and Nurse Mendez will provide supporting testimony about the pattern of false commitments at Riverside tomorrow. After 4 days in this place, I might finally have a chance to tell my story to someone with the power to do something about it. Emma, what if they refuse to release me? What if the judge believes Michael and Sandra's version of events? Then we keep fighting. Mrs. Chen says even if the initial hearing doesn't go our way, we'll have established grounds for a more thorough investigation. And Patrick, there's something else. Mrs. Chen has been in contact with other families who've been through similar situations. We're not alone in this. After hanging up, I sat on my bed holding Captain Cuddles and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 4 days ago, I'd been a broken grandfather, silenced and discredited by his own family. Now I had allies, Emma, Mrs. Chen, Dr. Martinez, Nurse Mendez, and possibly other families fighting similar battles. Tomorrow would determine whether justice was possible or whether I'd spend the rest of my life in places like Riverside, forgotten and dismissed as a delusional old man. But tonight, for the first time since Tommy's death, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. I looked at Captain Cuddles, at the small rip in his seam where Emma had hidden the phone that changed everything. "Tomorrow we start fighting back, buddy," I whispered. "For you, and for all the other kids whose voices have been silenced." Outside my window, the hospital grounds were quiet and dark. But inside the small room, hope was burning brighter than it had in weeks. The morning of my hearing arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to seep through the hospital walls. I'd barely slept, my mind racing through everything that would happen in the next few hours. Either I'd walk out of Riverside a free man, or I'd be trapped here indefinitely while Michael and Sandra enjoyed the fruits of their horrific crime. At breakfast, Dr. Harrison approached my table with a clipboard and what I'd learned to recognize as his concerned physician expression. "Patrick, I understand you have a legal hearing this afternoon." "That's right. I want you to know that I'll be testifying on behalf of the hospital. In my professional opinion, you're still experiencing significant delusions related to your grandson's death. Releasing you prematurely could be dangerous for both you and your family." I met his gaze steadily. "Doctor, what if I'm not delusional? What if everything I've said about Tommy's death is true?" His smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Patrick, that kind of thinking is exactly why you need continued treatment. I'd hate for you to do something you'd regret based on these paranoid fantasies." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Dr. Harrison wasn't just planning to testify against my release. He was warning me about what would happen if I continued pursuing the truth about Tommy. After he walked away, Nurse Mendez appeared at my table as if by magic. "Don't let him intimidate you," she said quietly, pretending to check my medication schedule. "Dr. Martinez and I will be testifying this afternoon too. The truth has a way of coming out, even when people try to bury it." The hours crawled by until finally, at 2 p.m., I was escorted to a conference room in the hospital's administrative wing. It was smaller than I'd expected, with a long table surrounded by chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly sickly. Mrs. Chen was already there, a small, fierce-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She stood when I entered and shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Walsh, I'm Elena Chen. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Thank you for helping me. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Getting justice for your grandson will be payment enough." The hearing was conducted by Judge Patricia Hawkins, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor who listened intently as Mrs. Chen presented our case. She outlined the suspicious circumstances of my commitment, the inadequate evaluation process, and the pattern of false commitments at Riverside. Dr. Harrison testified first for the hospital, painting me as a grief-stricken grandfather whose paranoid delusions posed a danger to my family. He spoke with practiced authority about my fixation on conspiracy theories and my inability to accept reality. In my professional opinion, he concluded, Mr. Walsh requires continued inpatient treatment to address his delusional thinking and prevent him from acting on his paranoid beliefs. Then it was Dr. Martinez's turn. Your Honor, I must respectfully disagree with my colleague's assessment. Mr. Walsh shows no signs of mental illness beyond normal grief responses. His questions about his grandson's death are logical and well-reasoned, not delusional. He detailed the pressure he'd been under to sign my commitment papers, the inadequate evaluation process, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the documentation my family had provided. I believe Mr. Walsh was committed not because he posed a danger to anyone, but because his questions were becoming inconvenient for certain family members. Nurse Mendez testified about the pattern of false commitments she'd observed, including her own experience with losing custody of her son under similar circumstances. But the real bombshell came when Mrs. Chen called her surprise witness. Your Honor, I'd like to call Ms. Emma Rodriguez to testify. I turned in shock to see Emma walk into the conference room. She looked older than I remembered, stress having aged her beyond her 22 years, but her voice was clear and strong as she was sworn in. Emma told the court about the night Tommy died, the real story, not the fabricated version Michael and Sandra had created. She described finding Tommy unconscious, the suspicious behavior of his parents, the overheard conversations about making sure the story was straight. "Yeah, they threatened me," Emma said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "When I tried to ask questions about what had happened, Michael told me that if I ever spoke about that night to anyone, I'd regret it. That's why I had to leave town." Mrs. Chen introduced Emma's recording as evidence. The quality was poor, but Michael's voice was clearly audible, discussing how to keep the story consistent, and Sandra mentioning the insurance money. Dr. Harrison's face grew pale as the recording played. Judge Hawkins leaned forward, her expression increasingly troubled. "Your Honor," Mrs. Chen continued, "we have evidence that Mr. Walsh's family committed him not because he was mentally ill, but because he was asking inconvenient questions about his grandson's death. Questions that, as this testimony shows, were entirely justified." She presented the insurance policy documentation, Sandra's internet search history, and the timeline showing how quickly my commitment had been arranged after I'd started investigating Tommy's death. "This is a clear case of elder abuse," Mrs. Chen concluded. "Mr. Walsh was illegally committed to silence him about a potential murder. He poses no danger to anyone except possibly to those who killed his grandson." Judge Hawkins called a brief recess, during which Mrs. Chen huddled with Emma and me in the hallway. "How did you get here?" I asked Emma. "I thought you were hiding in Oregon." Mrs. Chen convinced me that testifying was the only way to stop them from hurting anyone else. "And Patrick, there's something else. The police have opened an investigation into Tommy's death based on the evidence we've provided." My heart pounded. What does that mean? It means that even if Michael and Sandra try to have you recommitted somewhere else, the authorities are now aware of what really happened to Tommy. They can't silence you anymore. When the hearing resumed, Judge Hawkins delivered her verdict with the gravity the situation deserved. "After reviewing the evidence presented today, I find that Mr. Walsh's commitment to Riverside Psychiatric Hospital was based on fraudulent documentation and was conducted without proper evaluation procedures. Furthermore, the testimony suggests that Mr. Walsh was committed not because he posed a danger to himself or others, but as part of an attempt to silence him regarding legitimate concerns about his grandson's death." She turned to look directly at me. "Mr. Walsh, I am ordering your immediate release from psychiatric custody. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential elder abuse and fraudulent commitment charges." The relief that washed over me was so overwhelming, I nearly collapsed. After 5 days of being treated like a delusional old man, someone in authority had finally listened to the truth. But Judge Hawkins wasn't finished. "Dr. Harrison, I am also ordering a full review of all psychiatric commitments you have overseen in the past 2 years. If this hearing has revealed a pattern of fraudulent commitments at Riverside, there will be serious consequences." Dr. Harrison's face was ashen as he nodded stiffly. An hour later, I walked out of Riverside Psychiatric Hospital a free man, carrying Captain Cuddles and accompanied by Emma and Mrs. Chen. The autumn air had never tasted so sweet. "What happens now?" I asked as we stood in the parking lot. "Now we let the police do their job," Mrs. Chen said. "Detective Sarah Morrison has been assigned to Tommy's case. She's already contacted the medical examiner about reviewing the circumstances of his death." Emma squeezed my shoulder. "Patrick, I'm sorry I couldn't come forward sooner. I was so scared." "You saved my life," I told her. "If you hadn't hidden that phone in Captain Cuddles, if you hadn't been brave enough to call me and testify today, I'd still be locked up in there while Michael and Sandra got away with murder." As we walked toward Mrs. Chen's car, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael's number. "Answer it," Mrs. Chen advised, "but put it on speaker. If he says anything incriminating, we want witnesses." I answered the call with trembling fingers. "Dad? Dad, what the hell's going on? Some detective just called asking questions about Tommy's death. What did you do?" His voice was high with panic. All pretense of concern for my mental health abandoned. "I told the truth, Michael. Something you should have done weeks ago." "Dad, you don't understand. You're sick. You're not thinking clearly. We can work this out, but you need to tell them you made a mistake." "The only mistake I made was trusting you." There was a long silence. Then Sandra's voice came on the line, sharp and venomous. "You crazy old man. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed this family over your paranoid fantasies. I've exposed what you did to Tommy." "We didn't do anything to Tommy," she shrieked. "He died of an asthma attack, and if you hadn't been so busy playing detective instead of grieving like a normal person, you'd accept that." But her words rang hollow now. I'd heard the recordings, seen the evidence, witnessed their desperation to keep me silent. "The police will sort it out," I said calmly. "If you're innocent, you have nothing to worry about." I hung up before they could respond. Mrs. Chen smiled grimly. "They're panicking." "Good. Panic makes people make mistakes, and they've already made plenty." As we drove away from Riverside, I looked back at the institutional building where I'd spent 5 of the longest days of my life. Other patients were still trapped inside, some legitimately needing help, others possibly victims of the same kind of abuse I'd experienced. But I was free. Free to seek justice for Tommy, free to tell his story, free to make sure that his short life wouldn't be forgotten or dismissed as a tragic accident. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time since Tommy's death, I felt like I had a real chance of winning. 3 months after my release from Riverside Psychiatric Hospital, I sat in Detective Sarah Morrison's office, watching her review the thick file that had grown around Tommy's case. The autumn leaves outside her window had turned golden and red, marking the passage of time since that terrible day when I'd first realized something was wrong with my grandson's death. "Mr. Walsh," Detective Morrison said, looking up from the papers spread across her desk, "I wanted to update you on where we stand with the investigation." She was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes, but a steel backbone. Exactly the kind of person I'd hoped would take Tommy's case seriously. Over the past months, she'd become more than just the detective assigned to investigate my grandson's murder. She'd become an advocate for justice. We've completed our analysis of the evidence Emma provided, and combined with the insurance policy information and Sandra's internet search history, we have enough to move forward with charges. My heart began racing. After months of waiting, of watching Michael and Sandra continue their lives as if nothing had happened, justice was finally within reach. What kind of charges? First-degree murder for Sandra, based on the premeditation evidenced by her research into pediatric drug interactions. Second-degree murder for Michael, based on his participation in the cover-up and failure to seek medical help for Tommy when he could have been saved. I gripped the arms of my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was telling me. "When will they be arrested?" "Tomorrow morning. We wanted to give you advance notice because this is going to become public very quickly, once the arrests are made." The next 24 hours passed in a blur. Mrs. Chen stayed with me in my apartment, fielding phone calls from reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the story. Emma came by in the evening, bringing takeout Chinese food that neither of us really ate. "Are you ready for this?" she asked as we sat on my couch, kept in cuddles between us like a talisman. "I don't think anyone can be ready to watch their own son arrested for murdering their grandchild," I said honestly, "but I'm ready for Tommy to have justice." The arrests happened at dawn, according to Detective Morrison. Michael was taken into custody at his law office, Sandra at the pharmacy where she worked. By noon, the story was all over the local news. "Couple arrested in death of 10-year-old son," read the headline on the evening broadcast. "Father committed to psychiatric hospital for questioning death." Watching the news coverage was surreal. They showed old family photos of Tommy, smiling and gap-toothed, alongside footage of Michael and Sandra being led away in handcuffs. The contrast was stark, this beautiful, innocent child, and the two people who were supposed to protect him, but instead had killed him for money. The trial didn't begin until the following spring. By then, the prosecutor had built an airtight case. Sandra's internet searches were particularly damning. Dozens of queries about drug interactions, toxic dosages, and how to avoid detection during autopsy. The timeline showed that her research had intensified in the weeks leading up to Tommy's death. Emma's testimony was devastating. She described in detail the night Tommy died, the suspicious behavior of his parents, the conversation she'd overheard about keeping their stories straight. The recording she'd made, while not perfect quality, clearly captured Michael discussing the need to maintain a consistent narrative. Dr. Martinez testified about the fraudulent commitment proceedings, explaining how he'd been pressured to sign papers without conducting a proper evaluation. His testimony helped establish that Michael and Sandra had gone to extraordinary lengths to silence me when I'd started asking inconvenient questions. But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Mrs. Chen, who had traced the insurance policy back to its origins. Sandra had insisted on increasing Tommy's life insurance coverage just 6 months before his death, raising it from $50,000 to $500,000. When the insurance agent had questioned the large increase, Sandra had explained that they wanted to ensure Tommy's future college expenses would be covered if anything happened. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Sandra was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Michael received 25 to life. As the judge read the sentences, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Tommy's death, a sense of completion, of justice served. But the most satisfying moment came not in the courtroom, but 3 weeks later. I was visiting Tommy's grave, something I'd been doing every Sunday since the trial ended. I'd brought fresh flowers, dinosaur-themed ones from a specialty florist who understood that some children never outgrow their fascination with prehistoric creatures. As I knelt beside his headstone, arranging the flowers in the small vase, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Sandra's mother, Eleanor, approaching hesitantly. Eleanor and I had never been close. She'd always been polite but distant, clearly preferring her daughter's version of events to any uncomfortable truths. But now she looked older, worn down by the weight of what her daughter had done. "Patrick," she said quietly, "I wanted to apologize." I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. "For what?" "For not believing you, for thinking you were just a grief-stricken old man who couldn't accept reality." She paused, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I should have listened when you said something was wrong." "You believed what you wanted to believe," I said. "We all did." "No, it was more than that. I knew Sandra had problems. I knew she struggled with being a mother, that she resented the time and attention Tommy required. But I never imagined—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "She was your daughter. You loved her." Eleanor shook her head. "Love doesn't excuse what I did. When you started asking questions, I encouraged Michael to have you committed. I thought you were being disruptive, making things harder for them during their time of grief. I never considered that you might be right." The admission hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor had been part of the conspiracy to silence me, motivated not by malice but by the desire to protect her daughter from uncomfortable scrutiny. "I can't forgive Sandra for what she did," Eleanor continued, "but I can ask for your forgiveness for what I did, for helping them silence you when you were the only one fighting for Tommy." I looked down at Tommy's headstone, at the small dinosaur figurines I'd placed around it, and thought about forgiveness, about the difference between justice and revenge, between peace and bitterness. "Eleanor, we all failed Tommy in different ways. You failed him by not wanting to see the truth. I failed him by not protecting him from his own parents. The difference is that we can live with our failures and try to do better." Sandra and Michael chose to compound theirs with murder. She nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Is there anything I can do? Any way to make amends?" I considered her question. There are other families going through what I went through. Other elderly people being silenced by psychiatric commitments when they ask inconvenient questions. Mrs. Chen has started an advocacy group. If you really want to make amends, help us prevent this from happening to others. Eleanor nodded eagerly. "I'd like that. I'd like to do something positive with what I've learned." After she left, I spent another hour at Tommy's grave, talking to him the way I had when he was alive. I told him about the trial, about how brave Emma had been, about how Dr. Martinez had risked his career to tell the truth. I told him that his death hadn't been forgotten or dismissed, that justice had been served. But mostly, I told him that I loved him and that I was sorry I hadn't been able to protect him from the people who should have loved him most. As the sun began to set, I gathered up my things and prepared to leave. But before walking away, I pulled Captain Cuddles from my bag and placed him gently against Tommy's headstone. "You should have this back, buddy," I whispered. "You won't need to keep any more secrets now." The bear looked small and worn against the granite marker, but somehow right, like he belonged there, standing guard over the boy who had loved him. Driving home, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a broken grandfather, dismissed as delusional, and locked away for asking inconvenient questions. Now I was free, vindicated, and Tommy's killers were behind bars where they belonged. But the real victory wasn't the sentences or the vindication. It was the knowledge that Tommy's death had meaning beyond the greed and selfishness that had caused it. His story had exposed a system that could be manipulated to silence the elderly and vulnerable. His case had led to reforms in psychiatric commitment procedures and stricter oversight of insurance policies taken out on children. Most importantly, his death had brought together a group of people: Emma, Mrs. Chen, Dr. Martinez, Nurse Mendez, even Eleanor, who were now working to protect other families from similar tragedies. That night I called Emma, who was back in college finishing her education degree. "How are you doing?" she asked, the concern evident in her voice. "I'm at peace," I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. For the first time since Tommy died, I feel like I can breathe again. "He'd be proud of you, Patrick. You never gave up on him." "We never gave up on him," I corrected. "None of us did." After hanging up, I sat in my living room looking at the photos of Tommy that covered my mantelpiece. The gap-toothed grin, the dinosaur t-shirts, the joy in his eyes that had been extinguished far too soon. I couldn't bring him back. I couldn't undo the horrible things that had been done to him. But I could make sure his story was remembered, that his death had meaning, that other children would be protected because of what we'd learned from losing him. Sometimes justice is loud and dramatic, played out in courtrooms and newspaper headlines. But sometimes it's quiet and personal, found in the simple act of refusing to let the truth be buried. Tommy's justice had been both, and finally, my grandson could rest in peace.